On the late afternoon of what would become one of the most documented days in the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth, something unfolded on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee that would challenge everything the witnesses thought they understood about the natural order of the world. The location was a remote hillside, far from any town or village, accessible only by foot or by boat across the lake. It was the kind of place where travelers didn't accidentally end up, where anyone present had made a deliberate choice to be there. And on this particular day, thousands had made that choice. The exact date remains debated among scholars, though most place it sometime in the spring, possibly March or early April, roughly a year before the crucifixion. What is certain is that the event occurred during a period when Jesus' reputation as a teacher and healer had spread throughout the region of Galilee and beyond, drawing crowds that grew larger and more persistent with each passing week. The day began not on the hillside, but in the town of Capernaum, where Jesus had been teaching in the synagogue and performing healings that had attracted the attention of both devoted followers and hostile religious authorities. The pressure had been building for weeks. Everywhere Jesus went, crowds followed, pressing in so tightly that normal movement became difficult, normal conversation became impossible, and the risk of someone being trampled or injured grew with each gathering. His disciples, the 12 men who traveled with him constantly and served as both students and assistants, had urged him repeatedly to seek some solitude, to find a place where they could rest and regroup away from the relentless demands of the multitudes. And so, early that morning, Jesus and the 12 had boarded a fishing boat and sailed across the Sea of Galilee toward the far shore, hoping to find isolation in the hills beyond the small fishing villages that dotted the coastline. But the plan unraveled almost immediately. People saw them leaving. Word spread through Capernaum and the surrounding towns with remarkable speed, carried from neighbor to neighbor, marketplace to marketplace, until hundreds and then thousands began moving along the shore road, tracking the boat's progress across the water and predicting where it would land. By the time Jesus and his disciples reached the far shore and climbed the hillside looking for a quiet place to rest, they discovered they had not escaped at all. The crowd had outpaced them, traveling on foot around the northern edge of the lake and arriving ahead of the boat. Families, individuals, the sick seeking healing, the curious seeking answers, all of them converging on this remote location with a single-minded determination that made retreat impossible. The disciple Philip, a practical man who often concerned himself with logistics and planning, was the first to voice what several of the others were already thinking. These people had followed them for miles. They were far from any town. There was no food available, no infrastructure to support such a gathering. And as the afternoon progressed and the crowd continued to grow, the situation was going to become increasingly difficult to manage. But Jesus, according to the accounts that would later be written by those who were present, did not seem troubled by the logistics. Instead, he began teaching, standing on a natural rise in the hillside where the acoustics allowed his voice to carry to the outer edges of the crowd. He spoke about the kingdom of God, about faith and redemption, about the nature of divine love and human brokenness. And the people listened, sitting on the grass and rocky soil, leaning forward to catch every word. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, and still the teaching continued. Those who had come seeking healing pressed forward, and Jesus attended to them, laying hands on the sick, speaking words that brought comfort, and according to numerous witnesses, brought physical restoration that defied medical explanation. The crowd grew as the afternoon wore on. What had begun as hundreds swelled to what several of the disciples would later estimate at 5,000 men, not counting the women and children who were also present. Some scholars have suggested that the total number may have exceeded 10,000 people, all gathered in this remote location, all focused on the man from Nazareth who stood before them teaching with an authority they had never encountered before. As evening approached, the disciples began to worry in earnest. The situation had gone from inconvenient to potentially dangerous. These people had been sitting on the hillside for hours. Many of them had not eaten since morning. There were children present, elderly people, individuals who had traveled long distances and were exhausted from the journey. If darkness fell and the crowd tried to disperse all at once, chaos would follow. People could be injured. Families could be separated. And there was still the fundamental problem that there was no food available anywhere nearby. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was particularly concerned. He approached Jesus alongside Philip, and together they presented what they believed was the only reasonable solution. They needed to send the people away, not in a cruel or dismissive way, but practically, compassionately, before the situation deteriorated. The nearby villages could provide food and lodging for some, though certainly not all. But at least it would thin the crowd and prevent a humanitarian crisis from developing on the hillside. Jesus listened to their concern, and then he responded with a statement that caught them completely off guard. He told them that the people didn't need to leave, that the disciples should feed them. The response from the disciples was immediate and incredulous. Philip, who had a head for numbers and economics, did a quick calculation and pointed out that it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread to give each person even a small piece. The cost was astronomical, the logistics impossible. They were in a remote location. There were no markets nearby. Even if they had the money, which they didn't, there was no practical way to acquire food for such a massive gathering. Andrew mentioned, almost apologetically, that there was a boy in the crowd who had 5 small barley loaves and 2 fish. It was the kind of modest meal a family might pack for a day's outing, enough to feed a few people, but laughably inadequate for the thousands assembled on the hillside. Andrew seemed to mention only to illustrate how hopeless the situation was, as if to say, this is all we have, and clearly it's nowhere near enough. But Jesus didn't dismiss the offering. Instead, he told the disciples to have the people sit down in groups. The instruction was specific. Organize them into companies of about 50 each, arranged on the green grass in orderly sections where they could be easily counted and served. The disciples, despite their confusion and skepticism, obeyed. They moved through the crowd, directing people to sit, organizing the thousands into manageable groups. It took time, this process of arranging such a massive gathering, but eventually the hillside was filled with clusters of people, all seated, all watching to see what would happen next. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and according to all 4 gospel accounts that would later record this event, he looked up to heaven and gave thanks. He blessed the food, broke the loaves into pieces, and began distributing them to the disciples to carry to the crowd. What happened next was witnessed by thousands of people, and yet it remains one of the most disputed and debated events in the entire New Testament. The disciples took the broken pieces of bread and the portions of fish and began moving through the groups, distributing food to each person. And as they distributed, the food did not run out. They kept breaking off pieces, kept handing out portions, and there was always more. The initial loaves should have been exhausted after feeding the first group. The fish should have been consumed within minutes. But the supply continued, basket after basket, enough to feed not just a few dozen people or a few hundred, but thousands. John, the youngest of the disciples, who would later write one of the 4 gospel accounts, described the scene with careful attention to detail. He noted that everyone ate, not just tasted or received a token portion, but ate until they were satisfied. The Greek word used in the text implies complete satisfaction, fullness, the absence of hunger. This was not a symbolic meal or a spiritual metaphor that would be explained away later. This was actual food, consumed by actual people, in quantities that filled empty stomachs and restored physical strength. Families ate together. Children who had been restless and hungry grew quiet and content. Adults who had not eaten since morning found themselves satisfied by a meal that should not have existed. When everyone had eaten their fill, Jesus gave another instruction to his disciples. He told them to gather up the leftover fragments so that nothing would be wasted. This detail, recorded in all 4 gospel accounts, is significant because it demonstrates that Jesus was not performing a theatrical display meant only to amaze. There was genuine concern for stewardship, for not taking miraculous provision for granted, for treating even divinely supplied resources with respect and care. The disciples moved through the crowd again, this time collecting the remaining pieces of bread and fish. They filled 12 baskets, 1 for each disciple, with the fragments that remained after more than 5,000 men, plus women and children, had eaten to their satisfaction. 12 baskets from 5 loaves and 2 fish. The arithmetic made no sense. The physics made no sense. And yet the baskets sat there, full and heavy, physical evidence of something that contradicted every principle of conservation and scarcity that governed the natural world. The crowd's reaction was immediate and intense. People began talking rapidly among themselves, gesturing toward Jesus, their voices rising in excitement and wonder. Many of them recognized that they had just witnessed something that transcended normal human experience. They began declaring that Jesus must be the prophet, the one Moses had spoken of centuries earlier, the one who would come to deliver Israel. Some in the crowd, particularly among the men, began discussing a plan to take Jesus by force and make him king. The political implications were obvious. A man who could feed thousands with a handful of loaves and fish, who could heal the sick with a word or a touch, would be an unstoppable leader. Rome would fall before him. The kingdom of Israel would be restored. All the promises made to their ancestors would finally be fulfilled. But Jesus, perceiving their intentions, withdrew. He dismissed the crowd, instructing the disciples to get into the boat and return across the lake while he went up into the mountains alone. The people were confused, disappointed, some even angry that he would not accept the role they wanted to thrust upon him. But Jesus was resolute. He had not come to be the kind of king they envisioned, and the miracle they had just witnessed was not a political demonstration or a recruitment tool for an earthly revolution. As the crowd dispersed and darkness fell over the hillside, the disciples made their way back to the boat, their minds reeling from what they had experienced. They had held the bread in their hands. They had distributed it to thousands. They had watched it multiply beyond any rational explanation. And they had collected 12 baskets of leftovers from a meal that had begun with only 5 loaves and 2 fish. The event would be discussed and debated for years, centuries, millennia. Skeptics would propose natural explanations, suggesting that the miracle was actually a lesson in sharing, that people in the crowd had hidden food and Jesus' act of generosity inspired them to share with one another. Others would argue that the accounts were exaggerated, that a small group was fed, and the numbers inflated over time as the story was retold. But these explanations struggled against the weight of the testimony. For separate gospel writers, drawing from eyewitness accounts and independent sources, recorded the same basic facts: a massive crowd in a remote location, insufficient food, a prayer of thanksgiving, distribution of loaves and fish that somehow fed everyone present, and 12 baskets of leftovers collected at the end. The disciples themselves, men who had seen Jesus heal the sick and cast out demons, who had witnessed his authority over nature when he calmed a storm on the Sea of Galilee, found this particular miracle uniquely impactful. Peter, who would later become one of the most important leaders in the early church, would reference this event in his teaching, using it as evidence of Jesus' divine nature and his authority over creation itself. John's Gospel records that the day after the feeding of the 5,000, many from the crowd sought Jesus out again, crossing the lake to find him. When they located him in Capernaum, Jesus challenged their motives. He told them they were seeking him not because they had seen miraculous signs that pointed to his true identity, but because they had eaten the loaves and been filled. They wanted another free meal, another demonstration of power that would serve their immediate physical needs. Jesus used the opportunity to teach them about a different kind of bread, a different kind of hunger. He spoke about himself as the bread of life, declaring that whoever came to him would never hunger, and whoever believed in him would never thirst. The teaching was difficult, confusing to many in the crowd who had followed him, expecting a military deliverer or a political revolutionary who would use his miraculous abilities to overthrow Roman occupation. The theological implications of the feeding of the 5,000 have been explored by Christian thinkers for 2 millennia. The miracle demonstrated Jesus' compassion for human need, his willingness to meet people in their physical hunger, even as he called them to recognize their deeper spiritual hunger. It revealed his authority over creation, his ability to multiply resources and suspend the normal laws of nature. And it pointed forward to the Last Supper, when Jesus would take bread, give thanks, break it, and distribute it to his disciples, instructing them to do the same in remembrance of him. The symbolism of bread runs throughout the biblical narrative. Bread was the staple of life in first-century Palestine, the basic sustenance that families depended on for survival. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, he included the petition, "Give us this day our daily bread," acknowledging the fundamental human need for provision and the dependence of humanity on God for that provision. In the wilderness after the Exodus, God had provided manna, bread from heaven, to sustain the Israelites during their 40 years of wandering. And now, on a hillside in Galilee, Jesus was providing bread again, in quantities that defied explanation, demonstrating that the God who had sustained Israel in the wilderness was present among them once more. The location of the miracle also carried significance. The northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee was predominantly Gentile territory, outside the traditional boundaries of Jewish settlement. Some scholars have noted that the feeding of the 5,000 occurred in Jewish territory with a Jewish crowd, while a similar miracle recorded later in the Gospels, the feeding of the 4,000, occurred in Gentile territory. The implication is that Jesus' provision extended to all people, regardless of ethnic or religious background, a theme that would become central to the spread of Christianity beyond its Jewish origins in the decades following Jesus' death and resurrection. The detail about the 12 baskets of leftovers has also been the subject of much discussion. 12 was a significant number in Jewish thought, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, the complete people of God. The fact that there were 12 baskets, one for each disciple, suggested that there was abundant provision not just for the immediate need, but for the ongoing mission that the disciples would carry forward after Jesus' departure. The boy who provided the initial 5 loaves and 2 fish remains an unnamed figure in the Gospel accounts, mentioned only briefly by John and not at all in the other 3 Gospels. But his willingness to offer what little he had, knowing it was inadequate for the need at hand, became a powerful example of faith and generosity. Christian tradition has long held up this anonymous boy as a model for believers, demonstrating that God can take small offerings given in faith and multiply them beyond human comprehension. For the disciples, the feeding of the 5,000 was a turning point. They had been following Jesus for months, watching him teach and heal, but this miracle forced them to confront the full implications of who he claimed to be. If Jesus could multiply loaves and fish, if he could suspend the laws of nature and create matter from nothing or from insufficient materials, then he was operating with divine authority. He was not simply a rabbi or a prophet or a political revolutionary. He was something more, something that demanded a response beyond intellectual curiosity or casual discipleship. The miracle also revealed something about the nature of faith and doubt. The disciples had witnessed Jesus perform miracles before, and yet when confronted with the hungry crowd on the hillside, their first instinct was to send the people away. They did not immediately think, Jesus has power over nature. Surely he can solve this problem. Instead, they thought in terms of human limitations, economic calculations, practical impossibilities. Even after months of following Jesus, their default mode was still naturalistic problem-solving rather than faith in divine provision. This tension between faith and doubt would continue throughout Jesus' ministry and beyond. The disciples would witness the resurrection, would receive the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, would perform miracles themselves in Jesus' name, and yet would still struggle at times with fear, uncertainty, and the gap between what they believed intellectually and what they trusted experientially. The feeding of the 5,000 stands as one of the most well-attested miracles in the New Testament. It appears in all 4 Gospels, making it one of the few miracles recorded by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This multiple attestation suggests that the event was widely known in the early Christian community, that it was considered theologically significant, and that it was remembered and discussed frequently enough that each Gospel writer felt compelled to include it in their account of Jesus' ministry. The miracle also serves as a reminder that divine intervention in human affairs, according to Christian theology, is not limited to the spectacular or the overtly supernatural. God's provision often comes through ordinary means, through the work of human hands, through the sharing of resources, and the cooperation of community. But in this instance, on a hillside in Galilee, the provision came through means that transcended the ordinary, that pointed unmistakably to a power beyond human capability, and that left thousands of witnesses with a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. The people who were fed that day scattered across the region in the days and weeks that followed. Some became devoted followers of Jesus, traveling with the crowds that continued to pursue him throughout Galilee and eventually to Jerusalem. Others returned to their homes, their lives largely unchanged except for the memory of an afternoon when they ate bread and fish that should not have existed and left satisfied from a meal that should have been impossible. And in the years that followed, as the story was told and retold, as it was written down and copied and translated and carried to every corner of the Roman Empire and beyond, the feeding of the 5,000 became one of the defining moments in the narrative of Jesus of Nazareth. It was evidence of compassion, of power, of divine authority made manifest in the physical world. It was a sign that pointed beyond itself to deeper truths about the nature of God and the possibility of transformation, provision, and hope even in the midst of scarcity and impossibility. The hillside where it occurred has been sought by pilgrims and scholars for centuries, with various sites around the Sea of Galilee proposed as the location. Churches have been built to commemorate the event. Mosaics have been created depicting the baskets of loaves and fish. And the story continues to be read, studied, preached, and pondered by millions of people who find in it something that speaks to their own hunger, their own need, and their own questions about whether the physical world is all there is, or whether something more, someone more, stands behind it, offering bread to those who hunger and water to those who thirst. The event ended not with triumphant celebration, but with Jesus withdrawing alone to the mountains, avoiding the crowd's attempt to make him king, and sending his disciples back across the sea. The miracle had been performed, the need had been met, but the deeper work of teaching, of revealing, of calling people to a kingdom not built on earthly power, but on faith, sacrifice, and love, that work continued. And it would lead eventually to a cross, to a tomb, and to an empty grave that would become the foundation of a movement that transformed the world. But on that afternoon on the hillside, in the fading light with the smell of bread and fish in the air and the satisfied murmur of thousands who had been fed, there was simply wonder. And for those who witnessed it, who held the bread in their hands and knew it should not exist, there was the inescapable conclusion that they had encountered something beyond the boundaries of the natural world, something that demanded a response, a decision about who Jesus was and what it meant to follow him.